The government of Saskatchewan is looking to hear directly from parents and families as it considers whether to limit or even ban social media access for kids.
We want to know how parents and families feel about possible limits on social media. And if so, where is the line drawn? We strongly encourage everyone to take the time to express their views and return the postcards so that your voices can be heard.
So households in Saskatchewan will receive a questionnaire in the mail. It asks if they support social media limits for kids, and if so, what age those limits should be applied. It also asks if there are any social media platforms that should be exempt from limits. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe joins me now. Premier Moe, it's good to see you, sir. Thank you for your time today.
Good to see you, David.
You floated this idea in March of last year, if I believe. So why take this move now using snail mail to go after the digital giants?
Yeah, well, it is going to go into each household of every Saskatchewan family, and we hope we have a high participation rate. They're pre-stamped envelopes. They'll come back, and we'll compile that information, and that will, ultimately be, if we get a good participation rate, the government stance as we talk to the federal government, and either they act nationally on behalf of all Canadians, or B, maybe we have to overlay actions at the federal and the provincial level, because I think there are questions around, can we do this in an impactful and meaningful way and a successful way? And so we're asking to what level these limits should look like, and we want to represent parents in that conversation. And then two is how can we, act in collaboration with the federal government to make it impactful.
Well, this is what I'm wondering about, is the method by which you could do this, the mechanism. Because your neighbor, Wab Canoe, is talking about doing this in Manitoba. But this is really something that is more of a federal issue in terms of the ability to strongly regulate. So is this to build a collective action momentum, or is there something that you can do in Saskatchewan? Because it's tough to see how you could regulate Facebook and TikTok and all of these things.
Possibly to build collective action. We'll see what the response is, because we truly do want to know, and we think there's some nuances in just saying you're going to ban or limit social media, but then the question becomes, what age, what platform, all hours of the day or certain hours of the day. And so there are some nuanced questions that we want to represent properly our Saskatchewan families with. Definitely, I think there's a higher degree of impact and effectiveness if there's action at the federal level, and we'll first represent Saskatchewan families' views at that level. However, there may be some overlaying or supportive action that could come through the provincial tools that we have to increase the effectiveness and the impact of any action on where we land. So we're looking to open up the conversation, likely with the intent to move forward with some action alongside the federal government, as they seem very open to this discussion as well.
Well, give me an example, though, Premier, of I know what they've looked at here, the Online Harms Act, different, a duty to act responsibly and things like this for the tech giants in legislation. What could you do in Saskatchewan that would curb Facebook, Instagram, any of it?
Yeah, we looked, at some options that we have, and I know Premier Canoe had talked about having a reverse onus. So the onus isn't on parents, but it is on the social media platforms or the internet platforms to act and act responsibly, respecting whether it be provincial law or federal law in this space. And I think that's likely the right path for this conversation to take. It could be much more impactful with the tools that the federal government has, but there may be some small gaps, and we're seeing some of these challenges in places like Australia where they have moved in this space, where youth or others the claim is that they're getting around the limitations that are in place. And that may be a place where the provincial government could enact some type of supportive regulations or even legislation if necessary to further support a federal initiative and bring a higher degree of effectiveness to any limits that might be brought forward. Now, in saying that, I'm getting ahead of myself to some degree on the process, because our first goal is to just really truly ask where parents and families' head is at on the limitations in this space. I think we all agree there is harm that's being caused by consistent, daily, sometimes too much access to the internet and social media platforms. But we are interested to hear what parents have to say.
Well, help me understand how you calibrate that, Premier, because if the harms are, they are abundantly clear in a lot of cases, right? On the issues of depression and attention span, AI chatbots also part of this, not just social media. If the harms are so evident, why are you waiting for a survey to kind of tell you what to do? I mean, doesn't it make more sense to outline your plan so the public can react to an approach to dealing with it?
Yeah, you can add cyberbullying, body shaming, all sorts of things to that access. Because there's some nuances to the conversation. I'm not positive that parents and families would support an all-out 100% ban for anyone under the age of 16, for example, from ever accessing any social media platform. There are instances where there's some good that comes from access to support groups and such, and so we want to ask parents specifically what their views are. I expect, but I might be wrong, that there will largely be, at least in theory, a large number of parents that do recognize the harms from consistent, repetitive, scrolling through social media platforms. So I'm expecting their position is to be some limitations. I'm just not sure how far parents will want that limitation to go. Many, for example, will use YouTube for a brief period of time, maybe while they're making supper or getting ready in the evening. However, theoretically, they don't want their kids accessing social media or want to at least limit their screen time. So there'll be some nuances to the conversation. But I think this is I actually don't view it as a political issue. I think it's an opportunity for different levels of government and different stripes, partisan stripes, where we probably agree largely, and to have the conversation about maybe where we can land nationally and then support that with some of the provincial.
Right. We just lost Premier. Oh, he's back. There we go. All right. So this has happened to us before, Premier Mo. There may be some political divide on, limiting choice and free speech and these sorts of things. But we're talking about minors here, right? And we already put restrictions on minor behavior. Look, I got 12 and 9-year-old boys, so and they're big on YouTube, but they're not on social media. It is just that there is this harm that seems so clear. And when you hear from young people, the design of a lot of the algorithms, the craving and the addictive nature of it, it reminds me of the conversations we had about cigarettes, when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, about limiting those things. So what sort of conversations have you had with the federal government about how serious they are on this? Because there have been multiple attempts on regulating this, and now anything that limits the profitability and reach of the big tech giants in the United States becomes an issue in the big trade conversation because of the access they all have at the White House, right? So how does that play into this larger societal conversation?
That may play into the conversation at some point, but at the end of the day, we have to do the right thing by our children, that next generation. And you mentioned a couple of examples: cigarettes, alcohol. Those are largely regulated provincially across the nation, but they're very similar in how they're regulated between provinces. Marijuana, on the other hand, when that was regulated, that was done through federal statute. And so there may be a place for us to work together on any potential limitations in this space as well. But I would say, and you rightfully identify, that this is these algorithms, and as harmful as they are to children and youth, there is a business here, and that may very well become part of that broader conversation. However, we as elected members, and why we're sending out this questionnaire, is so we can appropriately represent the people that we represent in this province, the families and parents. We have to do the right thing at the end of the day on behalf of our children, our students, and the next generation.
Yeah, look, the drugs and controlled substances we talked, they are physical goods you can lock up and keep away. But, I've got my phone here with me, because you never know when news is going to break. But, kids take these into schools. They have them with them all the time. It's not a distraction you and I had to deal with when we were growing up. I know Alberta has looked at limiting access to phones in schools and these sorts of things. Does it start there with the device? Because without the device, you can't get access to the platform. I wonder if you look at that.
Yeah. We did that. We school phones are not allowed in schools in Saskatchewan. We did that a couple of years ago, I believe, and I think that was step one. And it's largely been received well. I had one complaint from a grade 12 student that didn't like it too much, but largely we've had very few complaints about that particular policy, and is largely supported by teachers. As it is enhanced the environment, the learning environment in our classrooms across the province. I see the social media steps in this conversation, and I don't view it as a partisan conversation.
Yep.
I view it as a conversation about families and parents. And I would come from the group that might say, as a family, government stay out of our life. But the fact of the matter is that the algorithms and the way that social media platforms are operating are not fair to kids. And ultimately, you had mentioned some of the drugs that are in our communities. All too often, when we have mental health challenges due to cyberbullying and other things, it manifests itself in an addiction issue with the youth. And if we can stop that, get beyond the treatment and get to some of the core, mental health challenges that are being created by social media, we have a responsibility to at least have the conversation and do right by that next generation. And that's what we're trying to start here, and then carry on with the federal government and see if we can't work together in this space.
Premier Scott Moe, I appreciate your time, and I apologize for not knowing you banned cell phones in schools already. That is my bad. That is on me. But Premier Scott Moe, we appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Take care, David.